Welcome back. Now, with bars still closed, Kenyans are finding other ways to enjoy their favorite alcoholic drinks. Most have resorted to just drinking at home, but that has actually seen a rise in home deliveries of alcohol. As much as a glass of wine after a long day may seem harmless, experts fear that many Kenyans are increasingly engaging in stress drinking. Well, could the COVID-19 pandemic be the reason? And what are the dangers of drinking at home? Well, my guests tonight are Anne Madhu, a recovering alcoholic and recovery coach, and Albert Muraya, founder and lead therapist at Beyersith Solutions. He is an addiction counselor specializing in addiction recovery and therapy for mental illness. Thank you both for joining me this evening. Albert, let me begin with you. Just looking at, in your view, what could be fueling this stress drinking that we're seeing rising among Kenyans? You see some people saying maybe it's out of boredom because most people are at home, they're not working. Some are saying it's stress. You don't know what will happen after this period passes. So in your view, what could be fueling this stress drinking?
Hi, Vicky. Thank you for having me on. I think it's a bit of both. I'm just thinking about what happens here during Christmas. Many businesses shut down for 2 weeks, and a lot of guys spend the entire time drinking. I think work gives us structure, it gives us discipline, it gives us a way of being accountable. We know we need to go to work on Monday, so we are a certain kind of way, and that moderates or modifies our drinking. But as things are now, we're required to stay at home, and it's open-ended. It's not clear for how long. And many workplaces are accommodating that by facilitating their guys working from home. But without the structure of the office, of the routine of going to work, every morning, then people are finding that they don't have the internal structures or internal disciplines themselves, and so they're taking liberties. So that's one. The other is, as you suggested, the situation is stressful, and more so because it's not clear how long it will be for. We shut down in Kenya quite early in terms of, how badly we were affected by COVID. The lockdown came in quite early. So that uncertainty is also creating some anxiety. And if you don't have ways of coping with anxiety, this is something new. Research shows that human beings are able to handle uncertainty or risks that they're used to. For example, say dealing with traffic. You're used to it, you deal with it all the time, so it doesn't bother you so much. But when you're dealing with a risk that is new to you, then the anxiety levels go up.
Right.
And so you start looking for these ways of coping, and you revert to what you know, what you have.
Right.
So there's a bit of both.
And Albert, we'll get to, the dangers of drinking at home. More and more people are doing that now. It's as easy as ordering it off your phone and it being delivered to your front door. And let me come to you. You started drinking at 10 years old, very young age. How did it start? Did it begin at home?
Yeah, actually it began at home. My dad, having been an alcoholic, a functional alcoholic, he kept a lot of Muratina in the house. And we actually started with Muratina, which was considered the harmless African brew. And little did we know that later on it was going to mess up our lives. Starting with Muratina, then we graduated to taking beer. My dad used to take me to the bus with him. And actually nobody saw anything wrong with that, because a parent is a person you trust. You'll do what a parent says because you trust that person. And actually most of the people who start drinking at very early age, they actually get their first drinks, their first drugs from people they trust, significant others. And very close friends, and so that's what happened to me. I never expected my dad to give me something that would destroy my life. So that's how it started.
And how did you kind of continue with the habit as you grew older?
What happened is that my dad died later on in 1977 when I was in Form 1. And his death was a big blow to me. I was very close to him. And actually, I never got time to mourn my dad. The moment he was buried, I was taken back to school. And I never processed that. For a long time, I tried to escape from that kind of reality. And I started now sneaking alcohol into school because I felt to keep his spirit alive, I had to continue with what he had started. So I started sneaking alcohol into school, and it affected my education. I was in one of the best schools then, in the 70s and early 80s. But then I didn't perform very well in my fourth form exams. And so I didn't join Form 5 and 6 and enrolled at Kenya Polytechnic then. Now it's the university. Enrolled for a 2-year diploma course in IM, that's institutional management. So with the boom, we used to get a boom of 500 shillings. A beer was going for 3 shillings and 50 cents. A packet of cigarettes was going for 3 shillings and 50 cents as well. So my dad taught me how to smoke. I started smoking at the same age. He would give me a cigarette and tell me to light it for him.
Wow.
So by the time I got to Kenya Poly, I was smoking, I was drinking. Now with the boom, 500 was a lot of money at a very tender age, and highly exposed, actually, to the Nairobi life. And my drinking got worse. Maybe Albert will explain the progressive part of the addiction. And I kept on graduating from one phase of addiction to another. And actually, got to a time when I started missing classes. On Fridays, I would skip classes to go and drink. And then Mondays, I would skip classes because of the hangover. So I'd drink throughout the weekend. I'm not able to go to class on Monday. And then this also messed up my education. I was not able to pass well in my exams. But since I was a government-sponsored student, I got a job at Moi Ikweta Girls, where I worked for 3 years. Again, fell out with the management because of drinking. I got my first born daughter when I was about 19 years old, and then my boyfriend abandoned me plus the baby. So that was another big blow that contributed a lot to my drinking. I started keeping alcohol in the house. I used to get alcohol from Laikipia Air Base, which was very cheap and readily available. I had friends working with the Air Force.
Right.
And I sort of became a closet drinker, where I would just drink and get drunk in the house.
Right.
And I fell out with the management of the school. It was a girls' school. And so I opted to leave. And came back to Nairobi, where I got a job at Pan Africa Hotel. And now my drinking even got worse, because alcohol was readily available. I made friends with the barmen, and they could actually sneak alcohol for me.
Right.
And what I used to do is that I used to actually clock in very early in the morning. We were supposed to clock in at 7, but I used to clock in at 6:30. And actually even the watchman would say, ati kama watu wote wangekuwa kama Anmathu, hii hotel ingekuwa imeendelea sana. But why I used to clock in at 6:30 was for me to go to the bar, take a swig or 2 or 3 of whatever drink I got. This time I'd become choiceless, I had no choice. And then take maybe a quarter and hide it in the water system of the vacant room.
Wow. So
that every time the alcohol level goes down, then I would go and have a sip. So it had gone to those levels now when I was working at Pan Africa of concealing alcohol everywhere in the changing room, in the vacant rooms, everywhere, in the dustbin. And I lost that job again, and I got a job at Kerichoti Hotel. Same thing happened.
Right.
Worked there for 3 years.
And you know, you're just describing
and then I lost the job again.
A downward spiral. The more you got deeper into this habit and trying to feed it, you know. And we'll come back to what was the wake-up call. You know, you lost your dad. It affected your education. You lost jobs as a result of it. But Albert, let me come to you, because what Anne described, you know, experts are fearing right now the drinking at home, what that can cause in terms of exposure to children. And then, you know, for the person who's actually doing the drinking, When do you draw the line? Someone could be saying, it's not much, it's just a glass of wine or a beer. I'm a bit stressed and, you know, get the edge off a bit. When do you draw the line before it gets into a full-blown addiction and it's a problem?
Yeah, thank you. Vicky, well, the first question about drinking in front of children, of course, as Anne has pointed out, that is negative modeling, and you're normalizing drinking. And if you're drinking excessively, as her father was, you're normalizing drunkenness or addictive drinking. So that in itself is a problem. Aside from the effects of alcohol on the person and their behavior, most people who develop a drinking problem, their personality changes once they start to drink. And you're exposing the children to that. So they'll become loud, they'll become abusive, they may become violent, and so forth. And all of that is you're modeling to the children, you're normalizing that kind of behavior. So I was reading an article a week or two ago in The Nation about a guy who was drinking every day, but he'd wait until the kids go to bed. He had the presence of mind not to expose them to that. But what happens eventually is that you lose control, and so those little rules you set for yourself, you're unable to keep. You know, drinking in front of children is simply not advisable, especially if you're drinking like that, you're drinking to the extent of abusing it. In terms of where you draw the line, that's a really good question. There are different opinions on this. A classical criteria that we use as counselors is something called a CAGE questionnaire. CAGE is C-A-G-E. So, you know, have you ever considered cutting down? Or is there any reason to cut down on your drinking? Do you get annoyed if people bring up your drinking or criticize it? Do you feel guilty about your drinking? And you ever drink, as Anne was saying, first thing in the morning as an eye-opener, all of which you know, points to progression. Nowadays, there are safe drinking guidelines. In my view, no drinking is safe because alcohol is a psychoactive substance. And as long as you're exposing yourself to drinking, there's a risk of it getting out of control. But what is considered moderate drinking amounts to 14 units of alcohol per week, whether for a man or for a woman. And a unit of alcohol is like, you know, a 350 milliliter bottle of beer, a glass of wine, or a tot of whiskey. So 14 of those spread across the week without binging, and not more than 2 per sitting. So for people who drink once or twice a year, that's plenty. But for somebody who drinks regularly, you know, every week or even every month, that's hardly anything. But drinking beyond that is you're considered now to be getting into unsafe drinking. And I'd say the vast majority of regular drinkers are way past that, way past 14 units a week. So that's what is medically considered safe, or rather moderate. I don't think any drinking is considered safe because it is a psychoactive substance. It is altering your perception, how you think, how you feel, the choices you make, your decision making, all of that. So yeah, to answer your question about where you draw the line,
right,
it's 14 units a week.
And you know, let's go to a more positive note. You've been sober for 15 years now, and you know, before you got to that point, where you decided something has to give, there's something wrong. What was it that kind of turned you into that direction, and you decided to get help?
Actually, Vicky, what happened is that my drinking now deteriorated so badly. My health started deteriorating. And actually, when I lost my jobs, Actually, I got a friend. We started living together, and we lived together for 5 years. I considered him more of a husband. And actually, after some time, he died from alcoholism. And then I went to Germany, got married to a German who was an alcoholic. And then 6 months after our wedding, he died. And actually now I was left with no money, and I started selling household stuff. I started selling my seeds and everything else. And that's when my mom realized there was a problem, and she took my children. This time around I had 3. And I started taking second generation alcoholic drinks. And then after some time, again, this became too expensive, and I started drinking changa. And this is when I now shifted from where I was living and started living in the slums. And I attempted suicide 3 times because I felt that nobody understood me. I didn't understand myself. I didn't understand why I was the way I was. And that's why I always tell people that walevi ni watu na pia ni wetu. People misunderstood me. Nobody wanted to be near me. I was actually abandoned by everybody, including family. So I was alone now. The only person who was close to me was my brother. Unfortunately, he passed away 2 years ago. And so one day I went, and my brother came and actually woke me up so that we can go to the Changadens. And he told me there was a police raid. And so I told him, what do we do? So he told me there's another base where we can get a drink, something totally different. So that's when we went to that base, and actually that's where we drank jet fuel. So I asked my brother, what is this that tastes like gasoline? And he goes like, India inaitwa mandege, piga flash ukalewe mbele. So I took that, I took 2 glasses and actually went to my shanty, and I blacked out for more than 48 hours because it was about 10 in the morning, and I woke up the following day 10 in the morning, and actually I vomited water which was mixed with blood, and actually I saw death. So I knelt there and I told God, God, I made appointment with you 3 times and you refused to take me. So this time it's me who is refusing to go. And actually I called a friend who is in recovery up till now. He had given me his number. He came and did an intervention. He found me in the Changadens and told me about rehabilitation. So actually I went and took his number. I borrowed a phone and I told him, come for me now, I surrender. And that's what happened. He came from Nairobi and actually took me all the way to Homa Bay. Right. That's where I did the 90-day program. And here I am, 15 years sober.
So I'm curious, after the 90-day program, because you know, people talk about
with family members.
Yeah, and people talk about things like withdrawal symptoms and, you know, really trying to kick the habit. Mm-hmm. You were coming off of years and years of an addiction to alcohol. Mm-hmm. I mean, the moment you leave rehab, what was that like for anyone who's probably going to be in that space?
The withdrawals, I dealt with them in the first 2 weeks in the rehab, and I can tell you, Vicky, that's something that I wouldn't like to go through again, because like the rehab that I was in, there was no medical detoxification. So we went through the withdrawals naturally, and there is so much discomfort in the withdrawals, so much pain, hallucinations. It's terrible. It's a terrible, terrible experience, and I think that is one of the reasons I haven't gone back to drinking. That is one of the reasons that has really kept me off that drink, because that's one experience I wouldn't want to go through. The withdrawals are painful, discomfort. I can't even explain them. Terrible.
And Albert, because we are running out of time, but you know, your view on what other coping mechanisms some Kenyans who are finding themselves slipping down that rabbit hole into addiction, what can they do at a time like this?
Well, I think the first thing is to get honest with themselves, as Anne did. It's a powerful story, Anne's story. We talk about rock bottom. Rock bottom is not necessarily when you've lost everything. It is the amount of pain sufficient to get you to reconsider your choices. And we try nowadays to raise people's bottoms, as it were, by raising their awareness about, you know, their situation and how bad things are, and the fact that they can get worse. It's possible if Anne, you know, had not made the decision she made when she made it, that things could have gotten worse. it's also quite possible that she could have made the choice to stop earlier than she did. And so the first thing is really just to recognize one's reality. That's easier said than done. Alcohol impairs your judgment. And so your awareness of reality is one of the first things that go. Often, normally, most people who are abusing alcohol are not doing it in isolation. They're part of a community, and there are people who are watching them and who are aware of their situation. And they'll often reach out to the drinker and try to help them. And depending on, you know, the level of honesty, the level of humility, you know, by the drinker, there's the possibility of listening and connecting with those who care about you and whatever it is that they're telling you with respect to helping you. So the accepting help that you're given. For Anne to have gotten out of her situation, she had to accept the help that her friend offered, and she could have refused. The third thing then is to connect with whatever help that's available. Anne is talking about a time 15 years ago, the resources for helping people with addiction were far less than they are today. In terms of Africa, Kenya is one of the leading countries for you know, resources, capacity on all levels for helping people with addictive disorders, you know, from psychiatrists, nurses, psychologists, counselors like myself, recovery coaches like Anne, the rehabs and so forth. Alcoholics Anonymous is well established here. That's another resource. Right. So, you know, accessing the various help that is available, and following the guidelines or the suggestions that are made. You know, when looking at making changes in your life, one is looking at understanding, you know, the habits, the lifestyle, the relationships that are supporting the drinking, because those have to go.
Right.
And you need to be quite honest about it. And some of these changes are not easy. That's why you need support. And the changes are not overnight either. As Anne will tell you, recovery is a journey. It's a lifelong journey.
Right.
And so whilst there is a beginning, you need to stay on the journey. You know, you need to replace your drinking friends with people who will support your recovery. People who are in recovery themselves are the best people to connect with. You will need to change your pastimes. You know, if you are drinking, say, at sports events, you're going to have to think about how you will engage in those sports events or whether it's even worth attending them. If you are drinking, say, in work situations after work with colleagues,
right,
you're going to have to figure out a plan to, you know, how you're going to deal with those situations going forward.
Right.
You know, and so forth.
And as we wrap up, thanks for that, Albert. As you wrap up, and the last word goes to you. I just want to read a tweet really quickly from @JoeKiash saying, Anne Madhu, please write a book. Your alcoholism journey and recovery needs to be documented. My goodness. If you haven't already thought about writing a book, Anne, this should be motivation. But what are your last words of encouragement to anyone watching who's struggling with what you did?
Actually, I've done a book. Here it is, Sober Again. You can get it in most of the bookshops in Nairobi. Yes. So Sober Again is a book by Anne Madhu. It's about my journey in addiction. And what I'd like to tell people, Kenyans, is that recovery is possible. And they should not look at a person who's been to rehab like the worst person. They should not look at rehabilitation centers as a punishment. They are safe environments where people go to get professional help. And what I'd like to tell the young people who are out drinking, trying drugs here and there, if you haven't started, don't start. You might start, then you will not be able to stop. I'm lucky I went to rehab and I'm alive. You might try, start, and not make it. And if you have started and you're not able to stop, kindly seek professional help. We are there. We are ready to help you. Get our number from Vicky, and we'll be there. And also at the workplace, I know when you resume work, when the workers resume work, when there'll be what do you call this? Go to work called by the president. I know a lot of employees will go back with a drinking problem. So I'd like to ask the employers, kindly come up with workplace policies, alcohol and drug abuse, alcohol policies, not to sack the addicts, not to sack the alcoholics, but to help them become better people.
Thank you so much, Anne and Albert. Wish we had more time, but just what you shared has been transformative for, I'm sure, many of our viewers tonight. And if you are someone who wants to get onto that path of recovery, I'll be sharing the contacts of Albert and Anne on my social media platforms, so look out for that. Thanks again for watching. I'm Victoria Rubadiri, our sign language interpreter. This evening, Eula Nzale. That's it for Citizen Weekend. Have a wonderful night. One Love is up next.